Hi, Adrian. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Lovely to see you again, Catherine.
Yeah, nice to see you. I'll give you a little brief introduction for context for everyone listening out there. Adrian has joined us on stage for one of the very first, or the very first UXDX in 2016, and we genuinely are delighted to have you back. I think you have a really great way of wording information for people, and I'm excited for our talk today. Earlier in a talk with Chris Grant, we had a designer's perspective on teams and work and productivity. And now we're going to have an engineer's perspective on specifically on building engineering teams during the pandemic and the challenges and successes of that for you. If you and for those who are listening, obviously, Adrian, you're an engineering director at Google, and I will ask you this question mainly to get it out of the way. I've seen in the news recently about pandemic employment and pay scale for Google. There has been some social media response to people paying different wages and based on location and that. What is Google's position on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the general approach for Google is I guess consistent with what it and what other companies have always done, right? I think you always aim to pay fairly and competitively in the market that you're in. And I think that's been consistent for some time, and I really do get that principle of fairness. It's not really, I think, sustainable to pay, for example, a London or a Dublin salary in another location where maybe the cost of living or the cost of labor is maybe a half or a third or even a quarter of that, right? So I think that sense of fairness really drives it. Paying an appropriate wage for the location, right? I think maybe it's probably bubbled up a little bit on social media because now the options for people to change location really expose that actually things may change. I don't really think there's something here. In a previous company I worked for, I was leading an engineering team in Dublin, and we had some engineers in America, and they were very excited about the potential for coming to live in Ireland, right? Mm-hmm. Until they learned that maybe their salary would be cut, and because you just can't sustain a New York salary, maybe in Dublin. Yeah. And I think it was a really interesting learning. So I don't think there's something new here. I just think maybe there's a lot more maybe heat or discussion around it, just possibly because obviously there is that flexibility and that chance to move right now.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And yeah, if anyone listening has any comments, put them in onto the chat on the right-hand side there. It is a valid point. The conversation has been around for a while, but it's brought to a new level because the opportunity has never been so prominent for such a large percentage of people, I guess.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Google, how are you managing the hybrid world there? It would be very different to a lot of organizations.
I think actually it's been a real interesting journey for all of us. You think about Google has always been a company that's prided in itself and in its offices and in bringing teams together physically in a great environment to be really creative, and then March 2019 or rather 2020, all of a sudden it changes. Right. And so I think we've been learning, and there's been lots of things, that we've seen along the way. I mean, one of the very interesting things was everybody used to always complain about the fact that there wasn't enough meeting rooms. Right. And then we discovered that actually the meeting rooms were a natural bottleneck on our ability to have meetings. Okay. One of the first things that happened when we didn't need meeting rooms anymore was a huge increase in the number of meetings that people were having. And that was a real learning, like, hey, not only maybe are we having more meetings in some cases, but actually the fatigue of being on a hangout or a Zoom call, all day really gets you. So it's really interesting to think about, hey, how can we actually make the time that we are together online really productive and really, really make it work for us, So what have we seen? I mean, it's actually really interesting. By the way, when it comes to, when it comes to meetings, I'm a huge fan of there's a book called Death by Meeting by Patrick Lencioni, and it's absolutely fantastic, and it just points out all the anti-patterns of the kind of meetings that you can have, kind of just digging in and saying, hey, okay, it's not, nobody likes being in a bad meeting. right? But not all meetings are bad, right? So being really clear about the intent of a meeting, right? So for example, hey, we're going to have a weekly get together. It's half an hour, and this is where we talk status. We just make sure that we all know what we're doing and we're not blocked, right? And we're all together, and actually that's not a meeting where we should start talking about strategic items, because we're never going to have enough time to do it justice, right? So really spinning out and saying, hey, there's a different kind of meeting. It's an ideation meeting or a strategy meeting. And it's more of the meeting where you really do close away your email and your chat windows and everything, and we're really going to solve a problem together, right? So being really intentful, about the kind of meetings and about their purpose, right? And and by the way, I mean, it's really interesting. That doesn't mean every meeting needs an agenda, right? Different meetings have different flavors, and you can have one meeting that's driven entirely by a round table, and then another meeting maybe that is more, more agenda driven and more work up front, shall we say. But yeah, I mean, I think, what we're seeing is, we were now moving to a place where offices are opening again, which is fabulous, right? And so we're already at a place now where we've got Googlers actually back at work in some offices. So, our meeting landscape is moving from one where you saw, whatever, 10 faces and everyone's bedroom or whatever it was, right? Now we're actually seeing, in some cases you'd have a bunch of people in an office together again. And that's actually great to see, right? And where we're going to is I think, really interesting. We're going to go to a place where there's a far more hybrid workplace, right? So what we see is you've got a bunch of Googlers, who are really happy. And actually, in general, we see this, the pandemic's been really interesting. Working from home is polarizing. This is one of the big learnings. Some people absolutely thrive working from home. Some people are doing really, really well, right? And then other people are not, right? They really, really miss the office, right? So, in general, there's a bulk of people who are looking forward to coming back to offices, right? And what that looks like in general is a 3+2 week where we've got people coming in for 3 days, and then the option to work from home for 2 days as well, right? And that's a really, really nice mix. Then of course there are people who can choose to be in the office all 5 days if they want. There are also people who can choose to go fully remote. Okay, so really getting that mix, and I think it kind of calls to I don't think we're going to go back, ever to we're all in the office all the time, in the same place.
And is that at an individual level you're going to make those decisions? Is it at your team level, or is it a Google-wide initiative?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think you need, I guess, that whatever norm we set now in terms of when people should be in the office, it needs to be consistent over, I think, a pretty large work group, right? So typically, Google kind of divides itself into what we call product areas. These are pretty large groups, right? And what's happened is the norms for how that organization will handle and interpret hybrid work are handled by that organization at that size. So for example, I'm in the commerce org. I work for Google Shopping, and the commerce org has decided, we're embracing 3-day hybrid week. We're embracing flexibility as a default. So, the general answer that we're going to default to, if somebody wishes to go remote, or transfer country, we're probably going to say yes, right? We're going to give that flexibility, right? And obviously, there's a very principled approach to how we determine whether somebody can go remote or not. There's a process that any individual can apply for there. But I think really, when we step back and look at it, the reality is, all of our teams are going to have this very hybrid flavor going forward.
Yeah, there's a lot to pack in there. And you mentioned one thing that kind of stood out to me was some people are excelling and some people are not excelling in a virtual world. How have you as a manager managed the differences in that and manage individual people to make them excel?
Yeah, I think there's a sort of there's a great leadership training that I did once, which was really enlightening for me. In the last decade, I think we've seen a huge, mass of people advocating for, give your teams autonomy, push everything down to the teams, and then within the team, push the autonomy to the individual, right? And this is great. I absolutely love that approach, and it's my preferred kind of style of leadership. But I think it's really, really interesting. I was challenged when I heard about situational leadership, right?
Okay.
That everyone, regardless of, where you are in your career, everybody finds themselves, in areas where they're completely in their comfort zone. They know their job, they're completely nailing it, or, they're new to their job, they're new to their role, expectations aren't clear, standards may not be clear, guidance may not be clear, and so really, you think about us as leaders and as managers, we really have to step up to that. We have to understand, where are our people? And we have to handle then, hey, if I've got somebody who does need guidance, right? That's great. I'm going to give them a different leadership style, maybe, from somebody who doesn't need that level of guidance, right? So I think, in general, one of the things maybe that I'm learning is, the office was so forgiving. When you're leading in the office and everybody's there, everything tends to fix itself or right itself along the way. But now that we're remote, it's different. And I think, we've got to, lead into that. You've got to be a better manager. That's the bottom line. So, we think about it, and, one of the big things, is, it sounds so maybe obvious or flat, but hey, are you setting expectations correctly as a manager, right? Have you been really clear? Hey, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do it by. And are we checking in regularly so that it's not a surprise if we discover, that maybe somebody's been held up, maybe by their own work or by somebody else's work, right? Are we giving feedback, appropriate feedback to the individuals so that they don't end up kind of, digging themselves into a hole, that we are making sure that they're, that they can be the best they can be. So I think it's kind of interesting. Some of that maybe, some of that a little bit of discipline, right, and a little bit of, situational leadership, I think really, really goes an enormous way, for our people.
Yeah, I really like that. Expectations, feedback, and discipline. It makes a lot of sense. And some companies are claiming that while individual performance is improving, collaboration and innovation is decreasing. What has been your experience with that aspect?
I think that's interesting. So maybe, yeah, let's tackle the two, right? You got the individuals, right? So as I say, yeah, like for some people, they're absolutely thriving. They're nailing their job, right? They're loving the silence, the focus, maybe the work-life balance, maybe the fact that they're able to, spend time that they might be commuting otherwise, actually spend it productively in their lives, right? So you've got the people who are doing really well there, okay? And then, of course, as I said, for some people, it's actually far more difficult on many levels, right? And I think we need to, obviously, as I said, you need to really reach out and handle those differently, and really be understanding and supportive of staff. Like really, empathy is so important in our leadership. We really need to step in and understand, hey, what's actually happening for this person, right? What's really happening on the ground, and then we can support and we can help them. Now, when it comes to
have you
innovation,
seen, sorry for jumping in
yeah.
there, sorry, Aid,
yeah.
Have you increased the empathy during virtual sessions, or has it got more challenging?
I think that's interesting. I think I would say, okay, if I was thinking of like a trend graph, right, of really important concepts in leadership, maybe in the last 5 or 10 years, I think empathy has been rising and accelerating, right? And I think that again, I think maybe the need for empathic leadership is so much greater now. It's so much greater because actually our people need it more. We've just come through 2 years of a global pandemic. Everybody has being afraid, being distracted, there's been so much going on for everyone. So I think maybe there's a bigger call maybe for empathy right now. And certainly, when I see the kind of themes, that my peers would talk about, I think, empathy, is a huge part of that. And part of that as well is vulnerability as well, really building trustful relationships and building trust in the workplace. I think that's become really, really important.
Yeah, it just piqued in my mind because I feel from our team's perspective, we've got a lot more personable being virtual. But for a large organization, somebody mentioned to me, they missed the office balloons to know it was somebody's birthday or retirement or, whatever it might be. And you don't get those prompts that you normally would.
I think I'd say it's actually interesting. You're right. Sometimes it's those little acts that mean so much, right? And I happen to be blessed on my team. I've got somebody that I work with very closely, and they always remember, right? So, and I'm terrible, by the way. I always forget.
That one individual.
But actually, we've got somebody who always remembers. But one of the other things, actually, that she's done, which has been profound for us as a team. We meet quarterly, and this began as it's an exercise called a life path exercise. Okay, so stay with me, right?
Yeah.
Basically, team gets together, right, and we all have a Jamboard. We all have a page each, and you get to do a quick doodle of the big things that happen in your life, and you drop it in pictures, and you do squiggles, and you do all sorts of stuff, and then everybody just says, "Hey, here's actually the story of my life in 2 or 3 minutes." Right. And we did one of these, and I think everybody obviously enters such a session kind of going, I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, and actually all of a sudden we realized that there were connections and similarities, that we had never known, and depth of character that you had never seen before. Because, sometimes we only ever see the person who shows up at the office, but we don't know all of the things that brought them there. So I think, the successful things stick. And one of the things we found is that, we're now meeting quarterly to sort of riff off some of those sessions and have these kind of really, really deep conversations, right? So they're giving us an enormous sense of connection. And I think actually it's been really successful. Like one thing that didn't work for us was, hey, let's have a coffee hangout, every Friday at 11, the first week, 10 people turn up. Second week it's 3, and then all of a sudden it's fallen off the radar, So I think, and maybe as well, that kind of calls to, hey, this is a really specific meeting about connection, about social connection, right? And, it's got a clear intent, and, I think that's a really important aspect there. We've been really clear about what it is and why we're there, and I have to say it really has helped build this, incredible trust in the team and this incredible deeper level of understanding and respect across the team.
Love it. Yeah, I'd like to. I think more people will be doing this.
Definitely worth a try. It was really surprising for me, I think, how that worked. Here's interesting. You mentioned collaboration, though, and innovation. And I think this is really interesting because I've been working on remote teams now, like actually since 2000. Okay, I was, was in a remarkably remote team, right? And I actually used to think that the fact that I was, I had such a long experience, as a remote leader or a remote worker, I thought that was a real unique selling point, right? Of course, now I don't have it anymore because everybody's been remote for the last 2 years, so it's all gone, right? But no, I think, I've seen teams innovate, remotely for so long now. And in particular as well, you learn from the open source community. There's just such incredible innovation from people who, may meet once a year, may never have met at all, and they're contributing to, and collaborating in an incredible way. So what do I think? I think we've seen continued collaboration and innovation. I think that's actually been really, really strong. And a big part of that is leaning into, new tools, and maybe leaning into, I learned something. I thought this was actually really interesting. I tried running a sort of an ideation session, and I think, a question and answer session on a particular topic, and there were about 30 people on the call. Okay. And what I learned there was when you ask a question, nobody answers. There's a magic number of about 7 plus or minus 2. If you keep the call small, right, and then you can get real engagement with the group, right? In a sense, there's nowhere to hide, right? And even then, you can be, gently playful as well, because there may always be people who are a little bit silent, and I really do believe that, if you're not actively including, you're excluding. Take that as a principle, right? So really reeling people into the conversation, you can do that with the group, right? And you can really get engagement, which I think is great, So leaning into new tools. We use Jamboards a lot. We also use Figma. I think everybody's got their favorite new, virtual whiteboarding, kit. But I think that's been great. Here's the thing, the future is hybrid. One of the things I remember most from working on a really effective remote team back in the early, the 2000s, is that if you can bring people together, once a year, twice a year is great, but even if you can bring them once a year, right? Bring together, part of that is, like the more immersive, intense ideation and collaboration that you can get if you bring them together. But then, the other part of then is the trust and the relationships that get built on the team. People move then from being, maybe a name on an email that they once saw to actually be, friends and colleagues, right? And I marveled at this, in my younger career. I used to wonder why it was that my boss could actually afford to take us all off the road. We were consultants, tech consultants. How could he afford to take us off the road, for 1 week in the year? And the answer was, how could he afford not to? The upside was just so great. He ended up with a gelled team that would go to the mat for each other, any day. So I think we'll see continued work on Jamboards and Figma boards and all this kind of stuff. But I think we will see then, bringing people together, even remote people together for a real punchy period, maybe every 6 months, to really make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, amazing. I'm running out of time. And I have so much to get through for you. I have an anonymous question here. I really like this. We talked about empathy, but how do you balance being empathetic and also ensuring that you're hitting targets for Google and for your targets?
Yeah, that's right. I think, obviously what has to be open and honest, even when it's difficult, right? And I think that, the question reminds me of something from Radical Candor around this idea of ruinous empathy. Hey, I want to be nice and I want to be loved by everybody, and I don't want to offend anybody, and so I won't actually give, the difficult feedback. Do you know what I mean? And the reality is actually that just doesn't work, right? I think as a leader, we've got to make sure we give, the feedback, when it's good, it's great. Celebrate publicly. When it's bad, let's criticize privately or give that constructive feedback privately. But let's make sure that we have those open conversations. So I have to say, I think that if you're, one other maybe key part, and this is something that I've learned, I think that when you build very closely knit teams, and everyone's very passionate about a project, right, and about the team spirit, it is hard to give difficult feedback, right? And so I learned the power of the word dispassionate. It doesn't mean you're not passionate. It means that you can set that distance, right? You can have that, that care for someone. But that said, you can do the right thing and you can give them the feedback that they need to get better. And sometimes it's hard news, but you're a better leader if you're doing that.
Yeah, I really like it. Just on Office. So recruitment wise, I'm not going to touch that because we in our prep call, you talked about you don't really have that issue because you're Google and blessed in that way. And a lot of companies out there will be jealous, but more so Google are famous for their office perks. But what are you doing for remote workers if some people have the choice of going hybrid or staying remote?
Yeah, so it's interesting. As I say, our offices will open again. And if you look at kind of the overall strategy, the bulk of people will be in the office for some period of the time. right? So the really nice Google offices and all the perks will continue. I have not heard of shipping perks to to remote workers. I don't think that's something that can be done. I actually think that there are, in some jurisdictions, there's actually tax implications and things like that. So I think that the office will always be Google's center for fun and perks and collaboration. And I think that will continue.
Yeah, and it's I was talking with Shopify. I've spoken at our event before, and they've used their office they're gone all remote, and they've used it as a collaborative space only, and to get people together. So as you said in the beginning, it will be there for people who want it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, actually, it's really interesting. Lots of people want it. You have to remember, Catherine, not everybody has a 6-room mansion with a home office where they can hide themselves away. There's lots of people out there who are like, I just want to be in the office. I don't want to work from my room or my kitchen table in my apartment. I actually need to get out, right? Yeah. So, people will be, it'll be a nice mix.
Yeah, no, it'll be really great. And so if people are deciding different things, does all communication need to be async? And this is talking specifically on if you are remote, or if some people are in the office and some people are remote. How do you ensure alignment there?
I think you need to be really thoughtful about the situation you're in. Okay. Great. So there's no one size fits all, right? One of my big things, and it's a real, it's shockingly simple, is really understand your time zone. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you're working across a team, and it turns out then that, let's say there's a 10-hour time difference, basically, you're either, the only overlap you have maybe is early in somebody's morning or late in somebody's evening. It can be very, very difficult. Okay. So you've really got to understand, well, how are we going to manage this time zone, right? So working the overlap is really good. And then when you're make sure that the meetings that need collaboration are in those overlap times. I think that one big thing about the overall decision making, one big thing is actually to be really clear, how are we going to make a decision? Right? Because lots of places, I think, lean into now a very consensus-driven approach. And this is great depending on the kind of decision that you're trying to make and the kind of culture that you've got. Okay. Sometimes, though, the best thing is actually to mix it up a little bit and say, hey, this actually isn't a consensus decision, and it's not a democracy. This is going to be a decision a leader's got to take, right? So we're going to make sure we make the decision process clear. And then we can communicate together to get the alignment that we need or get the input that we need. And then we can communicate the outcomes, right? So I do think, it's going to be a mix. For sure, I think that it's really important that, you get the balance between, chat, which is very immediate, okay, and email. It's funny. It's so great. Somebody pointed out the worst thing you can do as a leader is ping somebody in a different time zone with the word ping. It just induces terror. Like, oh my God, what do they want? Am I in trouble? Is something down? And actually, it's just like, just don't do that. I think it's really important to think about how your communication is landing, when it's landing, and just be really thoughtful about that. Understand your team and understand their needs.
And maybe note at the same time, you don't have to schedule emails to fit at appropriate time. If you're working, you're working too, maybe.
Yeah, that's true. And that's true. I mean, I think, obviously everyone's time is going to be different. Mm-hmm. One thing I have learned, though, there's a wonderful, wonderful feature in Gmail, which is a scheduled send. So if you're working late on Friday night, you can actually have it send automatically on Monday morning. And that means you're not interrupting anybody at the weekend. Right. Because again, weekend emails from managers creates a huddle or a hustle. And actually, maybe you don't want that. So be thoughtful.
That's very true. And that's a nice note to end on. I could talk to you genuinely all day, Ace. You are a mind. I will say the next time I get you on, can you do a presentation to the piano? Because that would be great.
I might have to pull in my daughter to play on the piano, but we'll see if I can work that out, Catherine.
Background.
All right. Thanks very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.